All right, we are live. Hello, my name is Lana Bashinsky, which if you've been watching the series of these, you're probably sick of this little intro spiel. But this is the fifth in a short series of podcasts we are releasing in the weeks leading up to GDC. We have been meeting and conducting brief interviews with the speakers involved with this year's Animation Micro Talks at the Animation Bootcamp. I am very happy to be here today with Mark Pullyblank. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Lana.
How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you very much.
Fantastic. I know that I'll mess it up if I do it. So how about you go ahead and introduce yourself?
All right, well, like you, I'm a fellow Albertan, which is very exciting. I moved out to Vancouver in my youth, and I eventually found my way to an animation school, and I became an animator. I actually came into the animation industry fairly late. It's interesting. I went back to school as a 33-year-old adult. I think I was 33. It was
Oh,
1999.
wow.
Yeah. So I was late to it, and I was very, very desperate. My fellow students used to tell me that I had an unfair motivational advantage in that I had two small children at home that I had to feed. So I worked, and I got my very first job out of school, working on the first Garfield movie.
Ah,
Yeah,
did you get to
at,
meet Bill?
I didn't. You know what? The funny thing about that film is that Bill Murray, he doesn't work with an agent. He has a 1-800 number. So to get him to work on your film, you just have to first of all find the number, and then you have to pester him. And one of the screenwriters on the first Garfield movie was a guy named Joel Cohen, sorry, Joel Cohen, who happens to have the same name as one of the Coen brothers who did like Fargo and The Big Lebowski.
And Hail
And Bill,
Caesar coming up.
yeah, exactly. And Bill Murray thought that was him. So he signed on to Garfield because he thought it was the Coen brothers. And then he found out after at least that's his. So anyways, he made the entire production a nightmare for everyone involved. Not us per se, but the crew that was with him, he kept changing things. And he was basically an overall pain in the ass because he was kind of pissed off he was doing it to begin with. But anyway, I worked my way up to an animation supervisor there, and then I worked at another studio called Frantic Films in Vancouver, which was great. And then I was fortunate enough to, as you know, in this industry, you meet a few people, and those people, it's sort of like a spider web network, people just sort of fly all over the place. And I got a call from a friend in New Zealand working at Weta Digital on a film called Avatar, which I'd never heard of. And he asked me if I wanted to come out there and work on it with him. And I said, sure. And I thought it was The Last Airbender, which I was a huge fan of, the series.
Oh,
The
yeah.
Last Airbender film hadn't been out yet, but I loved the series. And I thought that's what I was going to work on. And I got there, and it was a small independent film called Avatar, which did fairly well in the box office. I spent a couple years there, which was exciting. I worked on Tintin and a couple of the Hobbit films.
Do you bring your whole family down there with you then?
I did, yeah. It was their relocation. What was funny is when I first got the job there, their relocation, shall I say, abilities are exceptional. And I was telling a friend of mine, I'm like, holy, their relocation package is amazing. I didn't have to do anything. They practically got me my passport for me. You know what I mean? They did everything. And a friend of mine said, well, they're on an island in the middle of nowhere, making super high quality films. Their relocation system has to be pretty solid, you would think, and it really was. And I took my whole family there, and then I came back to Vancouver after a couple of years. I worked at Sony Animation, and then I took a job, one of my favorite jobs, at a small studio called Goldtooth Creative.
My brother used to work there.
No, really?
Yeah. Darren Bashinsky.
I know Darren.
No way! Crazy.
Yeah, that's crazy. He was one of my animators on. I worked on a long project with him called. What the heck was it called? Sleeping Dogs. It was this Chinese. Basically, it was a Chinese version of. What's it? Grand Theft Auto. It was super violent and sexist. It was amazing.
Incredible. That's wonderful. What a small world.
Huh. Look at that. From Edmonton.
Yeah. I'm so sorry that I interrupted you for that, but I've never heard anybody say the words Goldtooth Creative other than my brother before. So fantastic.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I now live in Chico, California, which is a small town in Northern California. I work at the university here. I also work online for cgspectrum.com as a teacher, and I also have a VR company called Thea Interactive that I'm the CEO of. And that's me.
Incredible. What a robust resume you've given
I
us.
would say so. Well, I'm also really, really old, so that helps.
Well, apparently you started late in the game, so it balances out. Yeah.
It's true. I had some time to make up for.
Cool. So we don't want to hang around this next topic too long because these interviews are much longer than the actual talks are going to be. But would you mind giving us a quick overview of what your micro talk will be about?
Oh yeah, so I'm doing a micro talk on how to stay motivated. I really, really like that topic because it's a question I get asked a lot, mostly from students, but from some professionals as well. We talk about that a lot, and it's it's a difficult thing because we come to the arts, and when we you know what this is like, Lana, when you like make a statement like, hey, I'm going to go into animation or into the arts. There's no shortage of people telling you that it's really hard and you'll never succeed, and so you kind of you sort of have your back up against the wall, and you sort of have this, you're sort of bearing this kind of like this attitude where like I have something to prove, and then when you get deep down into it and you realize perhaps, especially in the beginning, that you're not as good at it as you thought you were going to be, which was my experience. Suddenly I don't like it, but now I can't admit that I don't like it, because I told everybody I was going to do it, so I have to figure out a way on how to love it. So I think with what we do, and at least in my experiences, that motivational factor can be not only annoying, but can be actually soul crushing. So it's a good topic, and it's one I like to talk about a lot. Is how do you keep going when you feel like you don't want to do this anymore?
Yeah, and I think it's such a wonderful topic because it definitely applies to people who've been doing it 10 or 15 years of how to stay motivated then, and also people who just went through the, to borrow a term from you, the soul-crushing experience of a university education in animation.
Yes.
Trying to stay motivated enough until they get the job in an industry where things are insanely competitive and they probably got about 500,000 rejection letters. Like, I think it's just such a well-rounded topic. I am so excited for it.
Yeah.
It's
super scary, right? It's super scary. It's super scary when you're first starting out in your career and you don't know how it's going to end up. It's really, really scary.
Yeah, but you're in like an ultimate success story. Not only did you start late, but you have this incredible career behind and ahead of you now. So wonderful.
I figure if I can do it, anyone can do it, right?
Beautiful. So I've been doing this with everybody. I've put together this sort of short, kind of silly questionnaire that's more about the get to know Mark as opposed to get to know Mark's micro talk, so we don't spoil it in advance. And I was wondering if I could ask you a couple questions.
Yes, hit me.
Wonderful. The first thing first, I'm really curious because I also want to know what you studied before you studied animation. If you could do anything other than what you're doing, what would it be?
I would be a goaltender for the 1984 Edmonton Oilers.
That's where it's at. Oilers, Edmonton, Alberta.
Except I'm a terrible hockey player. You know what's funny? The years leading up to this, I was a musician, which is sort of synonymous with bum. But when I was in my 20s, I met up with this young woman. Her name was Holly McNarland, and she was starting out as a singer-songwriter, and she came to see me play with a band I was in, and she hired me as her bass player. And for the better part of the 90s, I lived in a tour bus, touring with her all over the.
Oh no! I should have warned.
It was really. Yeah. Did I cut out?
I probably cut out. I should have warned. My internet's been dropping while I've been doing these interviews for some reason. So if I just freeze and you're talking to, they can probably hear you, and I would just keep talking. Cool. But anyways, for the better part of the 90s, you were in a tour bus touring around.
Yeah, and so I mean that was like another thing. Like when I was in my teens and I was getting ready to graduate high school, and I remember my father said, "What are you going to do with your life?" And I said, "I'm going to be a musician." And he said, "That's all fine and good, but you don't play an instrument. You don't play any music." And I said, "Well, I'll figure that out." And so I sort of the same thing I do with animation is I just kind of buckled down and I grabbed a guitar and I just played the hell out of it until somebody hired me, and I had a pretty good career with it. I I got to tour with a band. I got to tour with lots of my heroes, and I got to make a living as a musician. And that was sort of, you know, then I met someone that I liked to be around that wasn't on tour with me. So I stopped touring and I started a family, and I switched it to animation. And it was the second time in my life where everybody said to me, "What are you doing?" Okay, this musician thing was all, you know, cute and fun and good, and you did well at it. You got lucky, but you're going to do it all over again at 30? And I said, yeah, I'm going to do it all over again at 30. And I did it all over again. So, I mean, the thing that I'm doing, and I always say this to my students, because you know how it is when you're in school and people are like, you know, you're learning how to model and you're learning how to texture and animate and all, you're learning all the stuff. And sometimes you don't know which one you want to do. And I always say to my students, what do you do when nobody's watching? What are the assignments you're rushing through to get to the one that you really want to work on? And some of them say, well, there's this modeling thing I'm working on. For me, what I'm doing is playing music. So whenever I'm not animating, whenever I have a free moment, I'm playing music. So if I was doing anything other than animating or playing hockey with the Edmonton Oilers of 1984, I would be playing music. That was a long.
No, it's beautiful. It's perfect. It's exactly what I'm looking for. I mentioned this to Jake in our interview that I think is really interesting. I love music too. I grew up, you know, doing piano lessons, and we were in jazz band and orchestra, etc. But my twin sister, who I mentioned to you earlier, she's a sound engineer. So we kind of both went and we studied similar things, but she went on that music track and I went on that animation track.
Where does she? Is she still in Edmonton, or is she?
She's largely in Edmonton. She has a home studio now called Bitter North Sound that she runs out of her home. Go figure. But she also tours around with the Tequila Mockingbird Orchestra.
Ah, I've heard of them.
Yeah, so that's her gig.
That's a great name.
Yeah, I'm very curious how you went from being a touring musician to how did you say, oh, animation now? Like, how did that even enter your brain? How are you exposed to that?
It's a funny thing. So there was a few years in my life where I didn't even have an apartment. I lived on a tour bus. I had a most of the time when I wasn't on the bus, I would just sort of couch surf. But I was mostly on the bus, and I had a post office box in Vancouver, so I could still communicate with people, because this is before the days really of internet. And then I decided to, you know, that I didn't want to do that anymore. I didn't want to leave home anymore, and I had to figure out something. And I knew I should probably do something practical. And I got a career counselor, which is a weird thing to have. And I thought, well, maybe I could be a music teacher. And I talked to her, and she said, you know, being a music teacher, you're just surrounded with terrible music all the time. Like, no one can play. And I'm like, yeah, that would probably bother me. And I sort of looked into the IT section. I was just looking at hot jobs, you know, and everything came with like a dress code, or it just had a feel to it that it was a difficult thing to go from, like, for 4, 5, 6 years of my life, I didn't even know what day of the week it was most days. I didn't know what time it was. I didn't know what day of the week it was. Didn't matter. It was a wonderful experience. But that entire time, and from the moment for as long as I could remember, I was always that kid who could draw, and I always loved to draw. I started drawing at a young age. I got positive reinforcement from it, so I never quit doing it. And I don't draw great, but I like to do it. So I thought, well, what about animation? And it sounded crazy, but my wife, who we had just got married at the time, she was just as crazy as I was, and she said, well, why wouldn't you do it? So I said, well, that's a good answer. That's how you
know you married the right woman.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She said, just do it. If that's what you want to do, just do it. And so I did it. But I was attracted to, and I trained to begin with as a traditional animator, and I worked briefly as a pencil to paper animator, but those jobs are few and far between, and it became brutally obvious that I wasn't going to be able to feed my family like that. I didn't have the skill set, and I probably wasn't going to get it anytime soon. So I made the switch over to CG, which was equally frustrating, but at least my characters would stay on model.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the perk. So speaking of new experiences, you've never been to the Game Developers Conference before.
Never. I've heard great things.
What are you most excited about?
I'm excited to see just what's going on. I've done SIGGRAPH, and I've done, I went to Australia to the PAX Festival whenever it was, October. And they're really, really excited. They're very, very noisy. I'm probably, when I'm there, I'm going to be most excited about going to bed at night. Because like I said, I'm super old. But, you know, all my students go and they come back, they leave for a week and during school, and they come back and they have all these stories, and there's all these connections, and I know there's going to be people there. There's friends of mine from Goldtooth that are going to be there. There's friends of mine from Australia that are going to be there. So I'm excited to see them. And I'm just looking forward to getting caught up in the whole vibe. I'm terrified of doing the talk. But that terror is something that I'm kind of comfortable with. So I'm okay with that.
So more of a thrill than a terror.
No, it's more fear than thrill, but you know.
Oh, I tried to spin it for you, but.
Have you done it before?
No, I've never. I've done talks for Tea Time. That's about it. I've done talks for Tea Time. I've done these webinar things for, you know, I've done 4 or 5 of them now, and then I've done webinars and things for Tea Time, but never the whole. I've never done the whole shebang.
Well, you know what I've done talks, and of course I stand in front of students and talk every day, and I've gone, you know, to Australia and done some talks, and I've done keynote addresses at schools for graduations, and I did a TEDx talk as well, which was the most terrifying thing I've ever done because it's very sort of stuffy. But this, the fact that you have to time it with slides.
Oh yeah.
Because I like to just get up and kind of just wing it, and the whole timing it with slides thing is a little frightening. But it's only like 5 or 6 minutes long, so I figure I can probably get through that without making too much of a mess.
I forgot. I don't think we've actually mentioned in any of these interviews the actual format of them. I just keep saying, oh, they're very short. But they're actually on a timer. We have X amount of slides up for X amount of time, and the whole talk will be done. It's like 5 minutes and 5 seconds or something like that.
Yeah, because each slide is 16 seconds, right?
Yeah.
It better be, because that's how I got it timed out.
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
15 seconds, I'm screwed.
You're going to be 20 seconds off, and that's unacceptable.
I'll cut my mic.
Yeah, we'll just start playing the music. Oh, wait, no, you'd be too early. Whatever. Anyways, so what, again, speaking of like first times and things, what would you say is your most embarrassing or funniest or worst mistake that you made as a rookie on your first gig?
Oh boy, I was so ill prepared my very first job. When I got there, my first day, the visual effects supervisor said to me, hey, can you open up, we were working in Lightwave, which I didn't know, which is, you know, it's really the, what is it, the chalk and slate of the animation industry. We'd be better off using, you know, cave tools. But anyways, the visual effects supervisor came up to me and said, can you please open up Sasquatch? I want you to fur a sphere and then put it on the render farm at full HD, medium priority. And then he walked away, and I didn't even think that was English. That was the craziest thing. And I always like to tell people when they ask me, I'm like, I learned 2 things that day. One is that I had no idea what I was doing, and 2, that there was no tolerance for that. And I flailed so badly that after about 2 months, I got called in, and they said, we're going to this was my first job out of school. I had like these 2 kids at home. I'd been in school for 3 years. Finally, it's like, maybe we're going to be able to pay our rent on time. We're living in this tiny basement suite. We're really just trying to eke it out. And they came and told me, like, it's not working out because you don't know what you're doing. And they had me sign this piece of paper because they were afraid that I was going to sue them for wrongful hire because they wouldn't let me animate anything. I got hired as an animator, but they wouldn't let me animate. They had me texturing teeth and doing all this kind of stuff that I didn't know how to do. And then they put me on nights. They pulled me off Garfield, and they put me on nights, and they gave me this garbage task that was clearly just, all they're doing is they're just waiting me out. So they said in 6 weeks, if we're still in the same boat, then we're going to let you go. And it's right before Christmas. It couldn't have been more of a poignant, like, horrible story. I had to come to my wife and go, I'm getting fired. And she's like, what? But we just got money for the first time. And I know, and it's Christmas, and, you know, it's a whole Scrooge humbug story. So it's not really embarrassing. It's really depressing. And I really had to sort of suck it up and figure out what the hell I was going to do, because the one thing that I didn't really care about any of it as much as I cared about the fact that I was being so sheepish about it. I was just so frightened and so scared and so meek that I didn't feel they really got a sense of who I was. So The next day I went into work and I called a meeting. It was with two people. It was with the head of the department and the visual effects supervisor. And I called them in and said, I need to talk to you guys. And I called them in and I said, if you want me gone, then let's just call it now. And I just stood up for myself and said, I'm not going to just come in and work nights and do some shit job just so you guys can protect yourselves. If you want me gone, I'm gone. But give me a chance if I'm going to stay. And they said, no, we'll give you a chance. And fortunate for me, the animation director on the Garfield film, who was in Los Angeles, was really disappointed with the animation that was happening through Rainmaker, and they hadn't let me animate anything yet. And I would go into dailies every day and look at the animation. It was terrible. It was really hurting. And he gave me a shot to do one night when I came in because they couldn't get an animation approval, and I did that shot. When I came in the next night for my night shift, they gave me 10 shots. And then the next day I came in, they said, you're on days, and everything worked out. So as soon as they let me actually do what I knew how to do, then my job was saved.
Beautiful. I love that you pulled them aside and like.
I just felt so bad. I thought, I can't. You know what I mean? It's like you can't have someone break up with you when you've just been a putz the whole time. You want to be able to be like, okay, this is the person you're breaking up with, just so you know I'm not a complete putz.
That's a lovely metaphor. So as a complete gear change here, do you have a favorite piece of video game or animation jargon?
Yeah, I've looked at that question because you sent them to me early. A piece of I don't have a piece of jargon. I mean, I'm sure like anybody who's ever spent more than like a month with me, would say, by jargon you mean some kind of phrase, or what I mean?
Like some word that you use the most. Like what?
Somebody said to me one time that they're combining squash and stretch into squetch. So for a while, I started calling it squetch because I thought it sounded funny, but it never actually took hold. Let's say it's squetch is my favorite animation jargon.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Little known squetch.
Squetch. It's a terrible word. Squetch is something that I think happens in my sweatpants after a hard day at the gym. I think that's
Squetch is what happens when you step on the wet gym floor after the workout.
Yeah.
And you're like, that's not whatever I put there. Anyways.
That's somebody else's squetch.
Very distracted.
I should have brought it back around to hockey and said, squetch is what I find in my jockstrap after a hard game of hockey.
Hockey, I found it was such a funny thing. Growing up in Edmonton, Alberta, I was the world's worst hockey player. So bad. I grew up playing it. My dad loved hockey. Everybody I knew loved hockey so much. We lived by this lake for a while. Hockey all the time. And I'm like, I'm just the worst hockey player. And then I went to the States, and I was here, and I had like a stick and like an acorn, like a pine cone or something. And I like did some, pine cone handling. People were like, "Whoa, easy does it, Gretzky." And then I realized that compared to all the Canadians, I was the worst. But compared to almost every American that I know, I'm the best hockey player.
Oh my God, you have no idea how many times I've said that. People ask me like, "Oh, you're from Canada, can you skate?" And I'm like, as a Canadian, no. As an American, I'm amazing.
Yeah. Perfect. So sorry, totally tangential. What do you hope people will take away from our micro talks?
I think I've gone to a lot of people talking about stuff that I like to hear about. Like, I go and see these guys from Pixar put on their Pixar seminars, and the one thing I learned from it was Andrew Gordon and Mike Venturini. The first time I sort of realized this, I went to one of their talks, and the thing is they're not saying anybody who does this kind of stuff isn't saying anything you already haven't heard. They're saying it in a way that when they were finished, I couldn't wait to get home to animate something. I think going to see somebody speak, the only true value is when you leave, you want to apply yourself in that direction. No matter what it is, you're motivated. If they're talking about social activism, you want to get out and write a letter to your senator. I don't know, but that's the information itself is important, but it's the salesmanship of it, if you will, that makes me think about it afterwards and makes me want to take action, right? So if I'm going to talk about staying motivated, well, then I hope people are motivated. If they're not, well, they just wasted their 5 minutes.
Yeah, at least it's only 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I can't really be held accountable for 5 minutes.
So if there's one project you could have worked on but didn't, what would it be?
Oh, that's a really, really good question. Um, you know, boy, that's a tough one. I love my all-time two favorite animated um, films would have to be The Incredibles. Looked like it would be so much fun to work on. And I thought when I saw The Incredibles, I thought that is the brass ring of animated feature films. And then I saw Kung Fu Panda, which I had very little hope for, and I thought that thing was really amazing too. I thought in Kung Fu Panda, I really, really loved all the facial work. I thought they really hit their prime on all the sort of subtle accents in the face, and I would love to learn how they did that. And I mean, I've done a lot of animation, but I've never had a piece of animation, facial animation, that had so much detail with seemingly no detail.
Very minimal characters, but like such extreme emotion that they're pulling from them.
It was gorgeous work. It was absolutely gorgeous work. I was completely captivated and compelled. Recently, Charlie Kaufman is doing a stop motion film called, I forget what it's called now. Dang.
Yeah, I have a really, really awful memory, but I don't know the name of it, but I know what you're talking about.
And I really love Charlie Kaufman. I like how he writes. I like his sort of philosophy on writing. You know, he said one time that, you know, he grew up at a time when he was a very awkward young man, and he wasn't terribly women weren't or members of the opposite sex or people he was attracted to weren't necessarily attracted to him. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And he said, you know, Hollywood represented this storyline or this ideal of what love is like. He said love was never like that for me. So when I started writing stories and writing films, I wanted to write them the way that I saw them. He did Endless Sunshine of a Spotless Mind, which I thought was a brilliant film. I would have loved to work on that film, but I think there was very little animation going on. But I would like to at some point. I have a pipe dream that someday I'll dabble in stop motion. So I guess stop motion, anything stop motion, I'd like to have a piece of.
I always say stop motion is my one true love. I did stop motion for a very short amount of time, but I felt like it was the only thing that made me understand how animation actually works. Like something about the tangible, like, oh, you move it and you're looking at the onion skin, and you like the act of moving it and just understanding, like, oh, you hold it, you take more pictures of it, and then it stays there longer. It was like such a tangible process that it actually sort of put that little seed of what animation should actually be like in my brain.
It's funny because CG animation is as close to it's closer to that than anything else. But I remember when I was first posing characters in Maya, I just wanted to reach through the screen and like grab them, just like if it was a stop motion. Really quickly, I had a student actually who was a stop motion animator. He worked on Coraline, and I think he worked on Nightmare Before Christmas. He's done it all, and he came to me to learn how to animate in CG, and so I started him on some simple. He got onto it really quickly, obviously, because it's all about poses and saving poses, and it made sense. But the first time he sent me a walk cycle, it looked like it was stop motion. It was the weirdest thing, just the way it moved. It was beautiful. I looked at it, I'm like, that's beautiful. It looks stop motion. And he wasn't in stepped or in linear curves or anything like that. They were all spline, but just the movement of it just had to have flavor to it. And I said to him, I'm really apprehensive to say anything about this because it's beautiful. And he said, well, I want to know what you would do if you were an animation director and you saw this in your film and it had to look more like. So then I gave him notes on how to make like the arcs a bit more fluid and things like that. But it was such a beautiful. I'd never seen anybody animate in CG like that. You could just tell he had a background.
He just animated everything on ones.
Well, it was on. I think it was on twos actually, but it just just the way it flowed was really interesting.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
So I only have two more questions, and one of them's a little sillier, but I love this question. It is. I don't know why. It just makes me giggle.
Yeah.
If you could have any useless superpower, and it has to be useless.
Okay.
What would it be?
Totally useless superpower?
As useless as you can possibly think of.
Well, like people always say they like to be invisible, and I hate that because they want to be invisible because they want to hear what people say about them. But I think that would be the most horrible thing. I don't want to know what people say about me. I don't want to know. If somebody comes up to me and says, "Hey, so and so was talking about you last night," I'm like, I don't want to hear it. But useless superpower. Useless superpower. What could it be? I'd like, how about, but this sounds useful, but I'd like to never be hungry again.
That's kind of useful. That's, I mean,
Is
that's
that?
like, will you never feel hunger, or will you actually never starve?
I never ever want to eat again and just have it not be a thing. Like I
That
don't need, I just stay the same and I never have to put food in my mouth. I don't enjoy food. My family on my mother's side has a long history of like they lose their sense of taste and smell very early on in life. They never really had a very developed palate to begin with.
Mhm.
Although now that I say that though, sharing food with my friends and family is a really fun thing to do. So I'd miss
But
out.
you can always go to the gathering. You
Totally.
don't have to eat. You can just sit around.
You know what's amazing is that in that instance, then I can do all the talking because everyone's eating, and that's what I like to do best anyhow. So yes, not is a superpower.
Oh, man, that seems like a true punishment to me. I love eating way too much. Like before we had this conversation when I was like trying to de-sweatify from my bike ride home,
Yeah.
basically all I was doing was like, what am I gonna eat after? And like not like a, oh, what am I gonna eat, but more like a happy daydream of I will eat food after this, and I was so excited. Which is probably worse. It would be a superpower for me to not ever want to eat again.
Not everybody. You know, a useless superpower though, not to dwell, but I think if it's a useless superpower, it's kind of like a parlor trick. Like I'm thinking like, well, what if you could fart yourself into the air?
That would be incredible.
But that's a parlor trick, you know what I mean? But that would be like if you could fart, oh Canada. Yeah.
Now I just want to develop that superpower.
Yeah. Well, see, that I think that's something you can work towards, and that goes along with you can eat anything.
There's a lot of Kegels involved.
There's a lot. Yes, there's a lot. There's a lot of kegels and eggs. I think hard-boiled.
Gross. Anyways, on that delightful note, do you have any final thoughts for people to mull over in the weeks leading up to GDC?
I don't. Nothing. Don't mull over anything. Just get some sleep. Don't sweat anything. Everything's going to be okay.
Are you saying this more for yourself or more for?
I'm convincing myself. It's only 5 minutes.
5 perfectly timed minutes.
That's right. I think to make the best of these GDC things, I think students come there and they're trying to attract attention for themselves. And I think if I'm going to talk to people coming to GDC out of desperation for something, don't sweat it. If your work's good, you'll get where you're going. You don't have to jockey for anything. Remember that you don't really have, the only thing you really have control over in your life is how good you get at something. And that's all you need. And if you get good at something, you'll be fine. If you don't, well, then you'll do something else. And
if I may just tag onto that, how nice you are.
Oh, that's Canadian, right?
Yeah, well, it's Canadian, it's stereotypically Canadian, but I feel like I've met enough people where I'm like, I like your work, but I don't like you.
Yeah, that's so true. Be humble. That's exactly straight. Like I always, from all the interviews that I've conducted, and depending on where I've worked at different studios where I was tasked with hiring people, and they would come and say, we need 3 seniors and 4 juniors. You know how it's like. And I would interview them, and I can give them the benefit of the doubt that you're really nervous. An interview is a terrible thing. But there were some people that would come in and just their posture would be super cocky, and they would be like monosyllabic answers. And they just sort of made me feel like I was keeping them from something. And I always like to tell people who are going in for a job interview, they'll come to me and like, I have this job interview, I'm super nervous, and I'll always tell them, learn about the studio you're going to be. If you've never heard about them before, learn about them, go to that studio, be excited about what they do, and ask them questions about what they do. Because what happens in that instance is you take an interrogation and you flip it into a conversation, which is always better.
Yeah, beautiful. Wonderful. Yeah. Well, wonderful thoughts. Thank you so much for chatting with me this evening.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Great. Well, we will see you at GDC.
I guess we will.
Yeah, the Animation Bootcamp, Animation Micro Talks, I think are at 5 p.m. I think they posted the times now, finally. But everybody can check online for the full day's schedule. I think you can also find it on reanimators.net. And other than that, we will see you later.
Thank you, Lana.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.